Hi everyone, it's Alice, and today I'm wrapping up everything I read in April. This month flew by, to be honest. I don't really know where the time went, but it's been super nice that spring has arrived, and I'm like 2.5 weeks away from exams being done, which I'm very much looking forward to. And I feel like I've been very busy, but I did manage to squeeze in a good chunk of reading, and I really enjoyed all of the books that I read, which is great. The first book that I read this month was from my spring TBR, and in that video I mentioned two books by Kingfisher, and I was sort of between the two. So we had Paladin's Grace and Sword Heart, and all of the comments were basically like, you gotta read Sword Heart. But apparently I am very contrary because I read Paladin's Grace. This is a fantasy romance about a perfumer and a paladin who sort of accidentally meet in the beginning of the book when the perfumer is trying to outwit someone who is trying to get her. And so they sort of accidentally meet. And then things get more complicated when they both end up witnessing an assassination attempt that goes wrong. And basically they spend the book trying to like figure out what the hell is going on with that because it's all very complicated. Of course, you'll probably know by now that I really like this author. I've read quite a lot of her books and I always really enjoy them, and this is no exception. I'm not a big romance reader, but with this author's writing style and her whimsy, I guess, and the fact that there is a lot of other stuff going on in this book, I had a great time reading it. This has dual perspectives, so we see both the perspective of the perfumer and the paladin, which I really liked, and I liked that throughout the book we got to see more of their backstories and where they come from and what they've experienced, and I really liked their dynamic. It's kind of funny and sweet and also a little awkward, sometimes kind of thirsty, but I just liked it. I think this works well for me because the characters are not like super young. They're a little bit older and they've both had lives and experiences. And I think I like those kinds of romances more. Sometimes it's not as intense, but I just think there's more to the characters as people when they've lived a little bit, and I just really like that. I also really liked the rest of the story, like the plot line with the assassination attempt and everything with that. This is set in a fantasy world, and there's like some political unrest in the background that I thought was quite interesting. It sort of drives the story forward. And although the romance is like a big part of this story, obviously, I just like that there are more elements to it. In addition to that assassination thing, there's also this like weird thing, like a really creepy thing about some severed heads and like some creatures that do something with that. And I'm wondering if that is something that is going to show up in the other books in the series, because although we get some answers, we don't get all of them. And I'm very curious as to what is really going on there. One of the things that I love so much about this author, though, is like the humor that she adds to her writing and some of the whimsy and things that she puts into her stories that just make you chuckle. Like, for example, in this one, the paladin likes to knit to pass the time, so he like knits socks for everyone. And I never see these things coming and they just make me laugh. For me, this is a 4 out of 5 star read. It was enjoyable and entertaining and easy to get invested in. Now, like I said, I'm not the biggest romance reader, so I am wondering what this would be like for someone who reads a lot of romance. I know a lot of people are very into romantasy these days, and I'm wondering if you read a lot of it, this might feel a little basic, but I really liked it. I think that this is the kind of romance that leans more into like the cozy, not too stressful, not too intense side of things. At least if you ignore the severed heads, it's not all that bad. Secondly, I read The Vanishing Cherry Blossom Bookshop by Takuya Asakura, and of course I had to read this during spring because look at it, like it's perfect for the season. This is a Japanese translated book, and it kind of follows the same recipe as a lot of these translated books follow. It's about this bookshop that only appears during the cherry blossom season, and it's like a magical bookshop, I guess. And it's that thing where like we meet different characters who manage to get to this bookshop during the cherry blossom season, and they have something unresolved in their pasts that they can resolve in the bookshop with the help of this bookseller and her magical cat. I feel like I read a lot of these kinds of translated books because I generally just really enjoyed them and I really like reading translated fiction. And even though these kinds of books are not necessarily the kinds of books that will knock your socks off, I don't really think they're trying to either. Usually I read these books because they just feel like a nice little break from everything else. And this felt like that too, but I did particularly like this one for some reason. I think the whole setting with the bookshop and the owner and the cat and all of that was really good, and I liked the different settings that we got to see in here. We meet all of these different characters who go to the bookshop for various reasons, and I really enjoyed reading their stories, but I think one of the reasons that I really liked this one is that we meet the characters a little bit before they go to the bookshop, so we get to know a little bit more about them. I feel like sometimes in these books, all of it takes place like in the bookshop or the cafe or wherever it's set, but in here we get to see a little bit more of the characters' worlds, which I really like. It is a quiet book for sure, so if you don't like these kinds of stories, you're not gonna like this one either, but I really enjoyed it. It did feel like a break from everything else, and it's sort of calm. That's not to say that the things that it discusses aren't serious. Like there are some serious themes in here, but the way it's presented is very like calm, I guess, which I just really enjoyed. I also really like the cat in here. It doesn't really speak, but it has a lot of personality in a way, and it's a big part of the story, which I really like. I liked that it wasn't just like a cat in the background. And yeah, overall, I just really liked this. It was emotional in like a quiet way, and I really liked reading about the characters, and I was interested in all of the stories of the people who came to visit the bookshop. So this felt like a very solid read for me, so I think I'm gonna give it 4 stars because I really liked it. Next, I picked up The Correspondent by Virginia Evans. This is an epistolary novel, so it's written in letters, and in here we meet this woman who is 73 when we first meet her, and her whole life she has written letters to basically everyone in her life, and this is sort of how she makes sense of the world. And so through the letters that we see in here, we get to know her and her backstory, but we also get to know a lot of the people in her life that she writes to. Now, this is a book that I had heard a lot of great things about when I started reading this, so I kind of went into this with, to be honest, really high expectations. I didn't really know what to expect, but I expected it to be amazing. And even though I really, really liked this, it's not a new favorite of mine, and I think I sort of went into this thinking it was going to be, and it was for sure going to be like one of my favorite reads of the year. That's not to say that this isn't a great book, but I just think I went into this with the mindset that it was like going to blow me away, and I don't think that's a great thing to go into a book with. It's sort of unfair in a way to the book. Firstly, though, I have to say, I'm always impressed by writers who write epistolary novels because I always think to myself, like, how are we gonna get to know the characters through these letters, and how are we gonna get, like, really deep in with them? Like, how is that possible through correspondence? But it is possible, so some authors are able to do it, and it was done very well in here. I think the personality of the main character comes especially strongly through in this, which makes sense because she's the main character. But I also really like that we see the personalities of these other people as well, and they do feel like a very well established character. I also just really loved reading about the main character. She is quite a character, and she's just a very interesting person. I've said this before, but I really like reading about elderly main characters because they've already lived a whole life and there's so much to them, and they're often a little peculiar about things, and I just find them very interesting, and that's very much the case in here as well. The main character feels like a real person in a way, and it's interesting because sometimes you don't like her, sometimes you don't agree with her, but you kind of love her anyway because she just feels like a real person. The thing that happened to me in here, though, I think like one of the reasons it's not a new favorite of mine is that I went into it with really high expectations, which is never a good idea, but I also went into it with the expectation that I was going to be very surprised by this book, and I wasn't. There are a few like mysterious things going on in here, like the main character gets these like threatening letters, and I think part of that was like a little obvious where it was going, and I found the resolution of that a little bit underwhelming. But then there's also this other part where the character is writing to a person that I don't think we're supposed to know who that person is. But to me, it was very obvious who that person was. And I don't know, I think if you don't realize that until the end, it has more of an emotional impact on you, like who that is and what that is. But to me, it just felt a little obvious. I couldn't think of anyone else it would be. And so when I got to sort of the end where that's, I guess, shown to us, I was like, yeah, of course, that's who that was. Like, it wasn't that surprising to me, and I think I just expected this to surprise me more than it did. I think what made this a strong read for me, though, was the main character and her complexities. I think she's interesting and sometimes a little unlikable, but as someone who really likes character-driven stories, it sort of makes sense that I really liked that part of this. I also really liked exploring her relationships with other people through these letters. I thought that was very well done. And I do think that the epistolary format of this was very well done and well written. For me, I think I don't really know what to rate this. I think maybe 4 stars, leaning towards 3. I think that feels a little harsh, in part because I know a lot of people love this book, but I think maybe 4 stars. And it is a book that I would probably widely recommend, not just because I think the main character is interesting, but I know a lot of people love this book, so I think it has a very wide appeal and that there is something for everyone in here. Second to last, I picked up The Secret Service of Tea and Treason by Holton. And I was definitely in the mood for some like lighter fantasy romance this month because here is another one. This is the 3rd book in the Dangerous Damsels series, and this series, like, it's all set in the same world. It's set in Victorian England, but we follow different characters in each of the books. So in here, we follow 2 spies who have to go undercover and pretend to be married to infiltrate this group of pirates and uncover this plot where I think the pirates are trying to like murder the queen. I think I've said this about all of the books that I've reviewed in the series, but these books are just so entertaining and so much fun. They are really over the top and kind of ridiculous, but I just really enjoy them. And I do think now, because this is the 3rd book that I've read, I know what to expect when I pick up one of these books, so I only pick them up when I'm really in the mood for them, and I do kind of feel like I need to be in the mood for them to enjoy them. But I just think these are a lot of fun, and it's just pure entertainment. Now, although this is very clearly a romance story, and that is a big part of this book, it's like the main part, I just really enjoy these other things that are going on in here as well. I feel like I sort of know the world now. We're in Victorian times, but we have like pirates and witches and flying houses and magic, and it's kind of chaotic, but it also feels familiar now because this is the 3rd book that I've read, and it's just a lot of fun. And I really like that these characters are actually like very proper, but they're trying to fit into this very chaotic world. But this world also has a lot of rules somehow, and just the mix of that is just really funny to me. It's clear very early on that these 2 main characters are thirsty for each other, and because I don't read a lot of romance books, like, I don't know, I'm not always used to it and I don't always enjoy that, but in these books it just works for me for whatever reason. I think maybe it's because the books are so over the top. You just kind of have to go with it. And so when I read one of these books, I am like prepared to just like go with the flow and to just enjoy it for what it is. It is sort of like a comedy of manners, and I know that's not for everyone, and it's definitely lighthearted. And I think I've said this before, but like, the tone and the humor in these books, it's kind of specific. So if you read one of the books and you read the first 30 pages and you're not into it, you're not gonna like it. But if you do like it, there's a lot more fun to be had. And I just really enjoyed these books. I think that this is my 2nd favorite after the first one. I think we took a little bit of a dip in the 2nd book. I don't really know what happened with that, but I really enjoyed this, and I really enjoyed the characters, and there's something about it that just makes me laugh and chuckle, and I just have a really good time. So I'm gonna give this 4 stars. They are definitely not for everyone, but I just have a great time with them. They're kind of crazy, but it's just a lot of fun. Lastly, I had to switch it up a little bit. I had to sprinkle in a little bit of like weird or dark, so I picked up this nonfiction book, Gory Details, Adventures from the Dark Side of Science, which is a book about all things like morbid and weird and gross and gory, about nature and our bodies and the universe, you name it, like all kinds of things. And as someone who loves a horrifying fun fact, of course I had to read this. I feel like I have to preface this review with the fact that I am the kind of person who finds a lot of these things just interesting. I'm not easily like grossed out or disturbed or really shocked whenever I read something. Like, it takes a lot for me, and I just go into it with the view that I find most things fascinating, and sort of the more disturbing it is, the more fascinating it is. Like, if it's something that not a lot of people talk about because it's gross or whatever. So I read these kinds of books and I'm not easily, like, I'm not really that, I guess, disturbed by them. But I did read some reviews for this that said, like, wow, I really did not expect how much was in here and like how many details and all these kinds of things. So just be aware that for me this was honestly not that bad, but I think for some readers it is. This touches on a lot of different themes, and the book is split into different parts. So we have morbid curiosity, that's disgusting, breaking taboos, creepy crawlies, gross anatomy, and mysterious minds. And I found most of these parts very interesting. Actually, all of the parts I found really interesting. I think the only parts where I was like, he, was when we read like specific things about bugs and insects, and I found that a little challenging, but I actually really liked that because a part of the point of this book is to challenge some of those things and to make you think about those things. Apparently, I'm not really worried about like corpses or like taboos or things coming out of bodies. None of that. I don't really care. But bugs and insects, I don't like them. And I guess I've always known that I don't really like bugs. I think they can be interesting to read about, but this goes into some of the grosser parts of insects and stuff like that, and ooh, I thought it was a little nasty, but it was also interesting. I do also really like the sort of scientific approach of the way this is written, which maybe makes it sound like it's a difficult book to read. It's not at all. It feels very accessible and easy to read, but I liked all of the science that we got to explore in here, and I also really like that you can tell that the author is really interested in what she's writing about, and I feel like that enthusiasm shows up very well in her writing. The chapters don't necessarily go into, I mean, they're detailed, but they don't go super deep into these things necessarily. Like, it feels like bite-sized pieces of information. That's what I expected when I went into this book, so it makes sense. And I think that's what the book is trying to do. But sometimes I wanted a little bit more, but I guess that's just a good thing because it's made me want to read more about certain kinds of topics. As you might know, I love a good book about death, like a nonfiction book about death. I think death is really scary, which is why I think reading about it helps me, and I just find that fascinating. And this is also something that shows up in here. But reading this kind of book makes me want to like delve a little bit deeper into some things. Maybe I'm not totally ready to read a book about insects, and maybe in particular eating insects. Ew, I don't know about that, but I might be interested in reading a book about rats, actually. Anyways, this was a fascinating read for sure. It was kind of perfect for me, and actually, if anyone has any recommendations for books like this, or podcasts, or anything like that, let me know, because I'm always just very interested in these kinds of things. I'm gonna give this 4 out of 5 stars, and I feel like I learned a lot. I think maybe my favorite fun fact that I learned from this was that meerkats are low-key cannibals, and that if you eat a slug, that can have really horrifying consequences. Not that I would ever do that, but, you know, I'm very excited to throw that fun fact at an unsuspecting friend. Also, I do really like that the different parts have like illustrations. So here we can see the meerkat that I just mentioned, and honestly some of it is a little like gross and horrifying. Here we have the bugs, but it's a nice little touch in a book like this. Alright, those are all the books that I read in April. And like I said, I feel like I had a really good reading month because I enjoyed all of the books that I read. I gave all of them 4 stars, which is pretty rare. Of course, I'm always looking for 5-star reads, but they are few and far between with me because I am very stingy with my 5-star ratings. But I really enjoyed all of these, and I had a good time reading this month. Hopefully, I can keep this up and just keep reading great books. That's always the goal, but yeah. I would love to know what you all have been reading lately. Tell me all about it in the comments. And as always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!